All right, we are here with 2024 presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy. Now that sounded good, but I got to ask you, did I get it right?
That was dead on correct.
Really?
Yeah, that was like family level correct. I like that.
Seriously?
Yeah.
I got to ask you, have you had, certainly in South Carolina, obviously some mispronunciations, any humorous ones come to mind?
Best efforts is my rule, right? Yeah, people, call me Vivek or something else. It's Vivek like cake, Ramaswamy. Yeah, thanks for asking.
I dig it. Well, hey, I got it right, man. I took a victory lap.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's something for a journalist, yeah.
But the real question, have you gotten a Trump nickname yet?
He's been referring to me on some of his videos as young Vivek Ramaswamy, and I guess I am young.
Hey, there you go.
It's true. Both Trump and Biden are each over twice my age and then some. So, young is fair.
Fair enough. You'll take it. Take it.
I'm a millennial. That's the reality.
So we've got your name down. Let me ask you this, though. I watched an interview recently that you did with, I believe it was Jordan Peterson, a Canadian
I did talk to him, yeah.
commentator. It was a very interesting conversation. You mentioned in that interview that you feel that the key issue, the defining issue of the 2024 election is to come up with a national identity. And in your intro video, you talked about it, and I want to quote it here, a cultural movement to create a new American dream.
Yes.
But you also said in the interview with Mr. Peterson that you weren't sure whether you could do it, and you weren't sure any of the candidates in the race could do it. And I guess I wanted to ask you, you still feel that way?
I'm encouraged. I think that was right as I was entering the race, and I'm very honest at every step of the way. I think the work cut out for us is monumental. Whoever has taken that office next, we're climbing Mount Everest. We're in the middle, in the thick of national self-doubt, in the thick of this identity crisis, where much of the country can't even answer what it means to be an American. I think that whoever takes that job needs to understand that's not going to be easy to fix. Okay, that's going to take fundamental change and leadership of a kind we haven't seen in this country in a generation. I'm in this race because I think I'm best positioned to actually deliver that for the next generation. I don't think it's going to come from a career politician. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's going to come from somebody who just does it based on grievance and vengeance either. I think you need somebody grounded in moral authority, grounded in first principles, and with an optimistic vision of what our country can be, but who also sees the difficult challenges that we face today. And so, I don't know. I can't promise that we're going to succeed at leading a national revival like Ronald Reagan did in 1980, but I think we can. Mm-hmm. Part of the reason I can't make that promise is it's not going to be just me. There's no magic wand model. Sometimes you can fall into the trap as a presidential candidate, or even people who watch you can fall into the trap of thinking someone's coming from on high in the White House to save us. It doesn't work that way. It's going to take everybody in this country doing their part. And in that way, we're already getting started in that movement. We're already getting started in doing that work. It's not just when I get to the White House. This cultural campaign that takes us there is an important part of that revival too. The events we went to a barbecue place earlier today, had about 100 people.
Hudson's Barbecue in Lexington.
You know it, in Lexington, exactly. People are hungry to express themselves. People are hungry to speak freely. Yet there's this gap between what people are willing to say in private and what they're willing to say in public. And in this campaign, one of the things I'm already doing is speaking the hard truths, the things that people think they're not allowed to say in public. What I say is, if you're an earnest, good-hearted American, and you actually have a reason to believe what you do, you are free to express whatever your beliefs are, as long as you get the right to in return as well. So in the campaign trail, that's one of the features of our events, is I think we're trying to give people the courage to speak their minds freely. And that's the first step to that national revival. And as I now see it play out, we're now 9 weeks into this campaign, I'm even more confident than I was on day one that we're actually going to do it. But the task is monumental, and I won't deny that.
What is monumental? You talked about not knowing what it means to be an American. We've got a growing number of Americans who don't know what it means to be either a man or a woman, so there's obviously some serious challenges there. But let's talk about some of that woke movement, the woke industrial complex, you've called it, whether it's ESGs, whether it's critical race theory, overt censorship and cancellation, the COVID regime. You've been railing against these things, but let me ask you this. Parental choice. How fundamental is that issue in achieving this sort of new American dream that you talk about so eloquently?
It's fundamental. It is not the end all. It's not the panacea. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think that it is an important element. It's necessary. It's not sufficient. Okay, so to be clear, part of the reason I want to shut down the U.S. Department of Education is that the federal government should play no role in the education of children. That should be left to localities. On the flip side, parents are the ones who ought to control the most important aspects of their children's education, full stop. Mm-hmm. But we can't just say school choice and stop there. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where a lot of Republicans make a mistake. What we're starting to see now is the certification institutions in the private sector for which schools are eligible to receive those school vouchers or educational saving account money. Well, they're starting to adopt some of the same racial and gender ideologies that found their way through the public school, and actually even in the private schools, you don't have school boards the same way you do in public schools. So it's not just that you have to say the magic words school choice and the problem is solved. To the contrary, we have to look at how those new threats actually reemerge, even in the context of private schools that can receive educational saving account money. Unless we're vigilant and alert to that, we're going to see the same problem crop up in new clothing. Here's another thing I would say is many people who are opponents of school choice from the left will say that, oh, this is going to make our public schools hollowed out. I don't think that has to be the case. I think public schools compete better when they are challenged by actual choice in the marketplace. Competition breeds success, competition breeds innovation. But we have to also take the step of unshackling those public schools by ending teachers' unions. Say what you will about unionizing against a big company, that's a separate debate. If you're a public servant and you're unionizing, think about it, who exactly are you unionizing against? You're unionizing against the very public that you purport to represent. That's wrong, and I think today our public schools, sadly, serve teachers' unions more effectively than they even serve their own students. And so I think school choice is so important as a next step, but I also talk about transparency in the classroom. Parents need to know what's happening in order to be able to make the best choices. I think that if the curriculum is taught in the classroom, it should be online. I think that there's actually no good argument I've heard against even putting cameras in the classrooms. I think that that's something that gives parents real visibility. But if you combine transparency with school choice, then you have room for civic education coming back. Then you have room for abolishing teachers' unions and allowing public schools to compete. And as the US president, I'll do my part, which is to abolish that Department of Education that creates the incentives for these local schools to adopt these toxic race and gender ideologies.
Now, one of your future rivals, we'll call him a future rival in this race, Governor DeSantis in Florida, recently signed a bill there, HB1, a very aggressive school choice bill, $8,000 per kid, no matter what their income level is. It's a universal bill. What's your take on DeSantis?
Well, I think that's a good piece of legislation that he signed, so I recognize that. I think a lot of what he's done in Florida has been pretty good policy. DeSantis as a governor, he's proven himself to be really effective at taking other people's ideas once they're tested and work well, and then to run with them. And I think that's a good thing to do as a governor. Kristi Noem did a great job in leading the way in identifying how you deal with COVID, and then Ron DeSantis watched that work out and said, hey, we're going to do that model in Florida. I give him credit. That had a positive effect on Florida. So he's a
copier.
He's a copier. He's absolutely a copier. He's a guy who executes. He's not a visionary. He doesn't have his own ideas. He takes other people's ideas, but at the level of a governor, he's okay, pretty good, actually, I would say, at implementing them. He takes a little bit more credit for it than is sometimes due. But I think that that's a good thing in Florida. I think has all else equal prospered under his watch, in part because of some of those other great policies from other people. Frankly, I say this as somebody who wrote the book Woke Inc. Mm-hmm. He's read that very closely and implemented a lot of my vision in that book, which I'm grateful for. But I think when you're talking about who we need in the White House in the middle of this national identity crisis, it's not the moment for a follower. We need a leader. It's not going to come from some professional career politician copying somebody else. It's going to come from somebody who's leading based on their own principled moral convictions, their own first personal understanding of the issues. And part of where you see Ron DeSantis' model maybe go wrong is when, Disney gets the better of him. He goes after Disney to get the, Twitter cycle and the conservative media credit for it. Mm. But when push comes to shove, if you don't pay attention to the details, those companies will get the better of you, as Disney did of Ron DeSantis, stripping that board he created of their very authorities. They say that Ron DeSantis retaliated against them. Ron DeSantis' response is that, well, they should have never had those crony capitalist protections in the first place from the state of Florida.
The Reedy Creek development.
Well, that's part of it. Mm-hmm. The Reedy Creek development protections are part of it. But one of those protections is that Disney was exempted from a political anti-discrimination statute where they said, you can't discriminate on the basis of political viewpoints unless you're a theme park unless you're the owner of a theme park of 25 acres or more in the state of Florida. That was
so acreage determines your First Amendment.
Yes,
protection.
And guess what? Guess who signed that into law? Ron DeSantis.
Oh, wow.
So that's the part he leaves out. And I think he makes it very easy for the left to come after him. I think it's one of the things Trump does too. I will not make it easy. The other side will come for us if we're on the right side of these issues, no matter what. But we can't make it easy for them to come after us as easily as they're able to when Ron DeSantis takes missteps, and Trump has his own version of the same problem. That's part of why I'm in this race, is I do think it's going to take an outsider. But I think it's going to take an outsider who also has a principled understanding of the Constitution, who understands why we're doing what we're doing, not like DeSantis, sort of a billiard ball that goes in whatever direction you're hit. You need to know why you're aiming in that direction. And I think in the White House, in contrast to a governorship, that really makes a difference in the moment we're in.
Now, this is a very different line of criticism of DeSantis than we heard earlier this week from the former governor of this state, Nikki Haley, who invited Disney to bring their 70,000 jobs and investment here to South Carolina. What was your take on our former governor's shot there?
I think she was off base. I think that, look, Disney is not some sort of clean actor here, okay? They should not come out of this smelling like a rose. They made disastrous decisions, disastrous business decisions, but also disastrous decisions for our culture to wade into a political debate about gender ideology and sexual education amongst 6-year-olds in public schools. They have no place doing that. So I don't think it's particularly helpful in our national or cultural revival for Nikki Haley to step in and say, hey, why don't you company come over to South Carolina? I don't think too many people in the Palmetto State are going to be too thrilled with that culture.
Doesn't bother you, though. That'll help.
What's that?
That'll erode a little bit of her support here, perhaps. Help you
out.
out.
I mean, I'm not. See, here's the thing. I don't do political calculus in what I say. Okay, I'm going to speak truth as I see it. I will call it as I see it. I would rather lose this election and speak truth at every step of the way than to somehow win by playing a game of political snakes and ladders. I happen to think, if you ask me, I think the winning electoral strategy is to speak truth. But either way, that's what I'm going to be doing. So, I don't know if that's good for me politically or not. But
let's speak a little truth on some numbers.
Sure.
Our country has not balanced a budget since 2001.
Yes.
Current deficit spending is approaching, a quarter of GDP? I mean, we're in a situation where the interest payments on the debt are going to be at $1.4 trillion by 2033. How do we tackle this without going after entitlements? And to her credit, Nikki Haley, the only really substantive candidate in this race who has proposed reforming those entitlements. Trump won't touch them. DeSantis won't touch them. Where are you on those entitlements, and what do we have to do to get America on a sustainable fiscal trajectory?
So here's the deal, Will. We have this debate in this country as though there's only two options. Democrats will say raise the taxes. A wing of the Republican Party talks, I think sensibly, at some point we're going to have this conversation about reducing certain of these entitlements. There's a third way. The better way, it's almost as though we've forgotten it's an option. GDP growth in this country, economic growth. I believe, and the math supports it, we can grow our way out of our problems. We've grown at over 4+% GDP growth for most of our national history. We're at an anemic 1 point something percent now. There are clear obstacles to GDP growth that we can alleviate today. The climate cult that shackles the U.S. energy sector while leaving China untouched. Unleashing U.S. energy, drill, frack, burn coal, embrace nuclear.
You're okay with all that?
I'm not only okay with it, I'm an evangelist for it. I reject the anti-carbon framework. I think we are privileged in this country. We should be proud to live a high-carbon lifestyle. You don't know who doesn't? Ethiopia, and you want to talk about Somalia. Well, part of the reason we have prosperity is because we utilize carbon. The other thing is we need to put people back to work. The other obstacle to GDP growth is we have created a culture of laziness, an epidemic of sloth in this country, and also the lack of skills-based training for people who could be useful participants in the workforce, but were incentivized to be a 4-year gender studies major in California and then have a bunch of debt in the back of it. We need to fix that too. And then the third issue is the Federal Reserve, which is a separate and much longer discussion. But
well, where are you on that? Obviously, Ron Paul's been driving that issue for years.
Yeah, I'm pretty close. I'm pretty close to where Ron Paul is. I'm actually going to get it done. And here's how you get it done, though, is you put the Fed back in its place to say you have one job. You stabilize the US dollar as a unit of measurement. You think about it with me is, let's say the number of minutes in an hour varied. You and I wouldn't have shown up here at the same time. You'd be walking out, I'd be walking in, and that's how it would work. It would be very inefficient.
Ships passing.
Exactly. That's what happens with dollars allocated into the proper investment projects. When the dollar's volatile, We don't allocate capital efficiently in the economy either. So you take those three things alone, just unshackling the U.S. energy sector, putting people back to work, putting the Federal Reserve back in its place, and I'd fire 90% of the staff there. We don't need 22,000 employees to do that. We
So you're arguing change the math. Change the math.
Absolutely.
Change the fundamental equation.
And so we've done the math on this. If you're right, if we're growing at 1+% something, we're going to go bust on a fiscal basis.
Very quickly.
In relatively near future. You know what the tipping point is? If you put a 3 handle on that, a 3-point-something% on GDP growth, we're in the black. We're in good shape. Our fiscal problems automatically go away. And I think with just those 3 steps I laid out, we could be at 4 to 5+% GDP growth in this country. So that's what I'm focused on. What does GDP growth mean? It means we all make more money. Grow our way out of our fiscal problems. That's something I think we can have political consensus on. I think that's something most people in this country want. And I think it's something that the next US president can actually deliver. And well, that's why it shocks me that literally nobody in either party is talking about it. And it's part of why it takes somebody who has built growing businesses. I've built multi-billion-dollar businesses. I'm 37 years old. I'm self-funding this presidential campaign. But that's the model that I want to bring back to our country and our economy as well. I know how to do it. Now I need to assume the presidency to actually put that into action.
A lot of folks have said you've got to pitch similar to Trump's, the outsider. Mm-hmm. I got to ask you this question. Trump in 2016 promised to end deficit spending, promised to start eliminating the debt, promised to cut middle-class taxes. Did he do any of those things?
He did some of those things. Cutting middle-class taxes, part of his tax reform. You could say, you could check that box. I think that he did take China very seriously. It's one of the things he pledged to do, broke from a bipartisan consensus. I think that immigration is much worse under Biden than it was under Trump. Had Trump not taken action, we would have seen the Obama-era policies continue. So I give him credit for what he accomplished. But I'm in this race.
Where do you criticize him?
I think he didn't go far enough. Mm-hmm. There are issues. What I think of myself as doing is taking the America First agenda far further than Donald Trump ever did. Because I'm doing it based on principles, not based on vengeance and grievance. That stops how far he was able to go. So take some of the issues I'm tackling. The US president can end race-based affirmative action in America with the stroke of a pen, with an executive order, because that's how Lyndon Johnson created it. Mm-hmm. I pushed Trump's people on why they didn't do it. They said it was not a political hill they wanted to die on. I'm not afraid of taking that on. I'm not afraid of tackling the climate cult. Executive order saying we're done measuring or mandating the measurement of carbon emissions in our economy. We're done with it. I'm not just going to talk about building a wall. I have said that on day one, we will send the military to actually secure our own border. If we can use the U.S. military to protect somebody else's border, we sure as heck can use it to protect our own, and I will. I'm not just going to put Betsy DeVos, fine person, I really like her, on top of the Department of Education and say reform it. No. I will shut it down because that agency should never have existed in the first place, and we have deep-rooted constitutional and legal understanding already of exactly how we're going to accomplish that. That's going far further than Trump did. Mm-hmm. And I think it's part of the reason why Reagan was able to accomplish in his 8 years more than Trump was able to in his four years. Because if you're doing it based on principles, on moral authority, on your conviction, grounded in the Constitution, and do it in a way that actually explains to the country why that ties to what it even means to be American, you can get more done. You can go far further. And so that's what I'm doing with the America First agenda. I think America First does not belong to Donald Trump. It doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the people of this country. And to put America first, we're going to have to rediscover what America is. And that's what this campaign is really all about. And that's the way I'm going to govern, which is a little different than the way Trump approached it. I'm also half his age and got fresh legs and I'm not yet jaded and cynical. And maybe I'll be a different person 8 years from now than he was 8 years ago. In some ways, I think in this race, I'm more similar to Trump in 2015 than Trump today is to Trump in 2015. And I think that's part of what's going to give me the energy to go further.
Fair enough. Let me ask you this question. You're campaigning for votes here in early voting South Carolina. You're in Lexington this morning. You're heading to Blythewood later today. We're talking here in Columbia, South Carolina. The Palmetto State, viewed as one of the reddest states in America, historically. However, the American Conservative Union has rated our legislature, which is Republican-controlled, not just Republican-controlled, we've got a supermajority GOP in the House of Representatives, one vote shy of a supermajority in the state Senate. Republicans own all the constitutional offices in South Carolina. Yet for the last 3 years in a row, the ACU has ranked that General Assembly the most liberal Republican legislature in America. And one or two of the folks working with you have worked for those guys.
Really?
Sort of.
That's news to me.
Well, but here's the bigger question. I'm not going to dog you on who you hire. Obviously, they work for you. They're going to go where you point them. But here's the bigger question. There's a war right now for the heart and soul of the GOP. It's taking place all across the country, but particularly here in South Carolina, between some of these more conservative voices on fiscal policy, the anti-woke voices, and then there's more of the moderate Republican establishment. Where do you fall in that civil war within the GOP?
I'm an unapologetic America First conservative who does not believe in compromise as the answer to our national divisions. I think the way we get to national unity, and some Republicans do make this mistake, they may call themselves moderates or whatever, and they're good people. I disagree with their approach on this. They think the way we get to national unity is by compromise. Let's compromise a little bit. Everyone's got to compromise, hold hands, sing Kumbaya, get to national unity. No, that is not how we get national unity. I care about national unity, but the way we get there is actually by being uncompromising about the principles that set this nation into motion 250 years ago. Free speech, open debate, self-governance, rule of law, meritocracy, that you get ahead, not in the color of your skin, but in the content of your character, the basic American ideals that make us who we are.
So identity politics are off the table for you.
What's that?
Identity politics are off the table.
Oh, identity politics, that's what's been the cancer on America's soul. I'm glad to see you and I have two different shades of melanin. So what is what I say. Our diversity is not our strength. Mm-hmm. Our strength is what unites us across our diversity. Mm-hmm. Right? Without that, we're just a bunch of different looking higher mammals with two legs walking some geographic space we call America. That's not the country I know.
Some with better hair than others.
Well, we're more diversity. There we go. And so I think that we have fallen into this diversity trap, actually, and become prisoners to identity politics with this breed of victimhood that goes along with it. I reject that. And I think that some people
called it psychological slavery, I think was the term.
I do call it psychological slavery. And so some people may call me far right for that. Mm-hmm. And the other positions I've taken, I view it differently. I'm unapologetically pro-American. Mm-hmm. That's the distinction that matters. To me, that matters even more than the difference between Republicans and Democrats. Those labels actually have come to mean very little. As you have some Republicans that favor, globalism and in an apologist way. Some Democrats like Bobby Kennedy, I disagree with him on a lot of things, but he's really courageous and actually calling out a lot of the hypocrisies of the regime media and the regime that's in power.
Vaccines and
absolutely, he had boldness. So to me, the labels between Republican and Democrat matter less than whether you are pro-American. Do you unapologetically embrace the ideals this nation was founded on? Are you willing to fight for them? Are you willing to make a sacrifice for them? Mm-hmm. Or are you fundamentally, and this exists in the country today, anti-American? Do you wish to apologize for a nation founded on those ideals? Kamala Harris or others are the face of this, Joe Biden included. I think that if you divide it up that way, it's not 50-50 anymore. It's easily 80-20 in our favor. And half the remaining 20 are people younger than me who never learned what those ideals were in the first place. So I think, Will, that we can win this next election in a landslide, akin to what Ronald Reagan delivered in 1980. That is what I'm running to deliver in 2024. And I think I am the single candidate in either party who can actually deliver that, not by compromising, but by embracing the radicalism of the American ideals themselves. They are radical ideas. For most of human history, it was done the other way, right? Self-governance, that citizens could be trusted to make decisions. Yeah, that would have been a crazy idea, crazy talk in old world Europe. That's what makes us us. That's what makes America great. That's what makes America itself. And I think if we revive that common idea, then I think we have a national revival ahead of us. And I think that winning by a 50.1 margin isn't going to be good enough. We need a moral mandate to get this done, to go further than Trump did. That's why I'm in this race.
Vivek, I know you got to run. You've been very gracious with your time. I want to ask you one more question. Sure. In South Carolina, obviously Donald Trump, the king, the 400-pound gorilla. You've got DeSantis on the move. You've got a former governor here, Nikki Haley, a U.S. Senator Tim Scott about to jump into the race. How do you break through that? And here's the bigger question. How much do you have to spend and how much are you willing to spend? to get there.
There's no cap of what sacrifice and what investment our family is going to make in this, both in terms of time, money, or anything else. I'll tell you this, we started this race at 0.0%. I'm already polling at 4th or 5th place, actually, in the entire race. If you look at this last week's national polls, I'm flat to Nikki Haley with half the name ID and twice the money in the bank, and well ahead of Tim Scott. And I respect each of these people, right? Mm-hmm. I'm going to expect each of them, even if I'm elected president, to play their respective roles in reviving our culture, not just them, but everybody in the country. But when we think about who we want in that office of the White House, dismantling, and one of the things I'm going to do is dismantling the administrative state. It is unconstitutional. The fourth branch of government needs to be dissolved. Standing up to communist China, actually with the spine. These professional politicians aren't going to get it done. If they would have, we wouldn't be where we are today. I think there's going to be 2 people in this race who matter. Donald Trump and myself. In 8 weeks, I've gone from literally being a nobody in this race to already being in the top 4 to 5 just in the last few weeks of polling, and we're just getting warmed up. By the way, it's about exactly a little bit ahead of where Donald Trump was in June of 2015 when he came down the escalator. So I think it's going to be between the 2 outsiders, Trump and myself. But you only get to be an outsider once. He did what he's made great contributions to this country. I respect that. I want to build on that foundation rather than to reject it. But I think he went about as far as he was going to go. I've got fresh legs. I'm the outsider in this race. I'm going to build on that foundation and do it in a principled way by going further, in a way that takes America First further, touches some of those touchy issues he wasn't willing to touch, from affirmative action to climate to using our military on the southern border. But I think I'm going to do it in a way that actually leaves us one nation united in the end of it, not on some path to a national divorce, but lead our country to a national revival. And honest to God, I don't have to be doing this just as Donald Trump didn't have to be doing this. Living a great life, writing books, building businesses. Yes, I've lived the American dream, live a great life. But I'm in this because this is my way of giving back to the country that allowed me to achieve the dream that I have. I want to make sure my kids' generation has access to that same dream too. And I think they will. I think we're going to be successful. But I think it's going to take everyone doing their part. If the people in this state do theirs, I promise you I will do mine.
Vivek Ramaswamy, I want to thank you for your time. I know you got your family outside waiting.
Yes, thank you.
We've learned his name, South Carolina. If you're interested in some options, you might want to learn his name as well. I want to thank you again for taking the time, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, man.
Thank you for your time, man.